Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening to another week's episode of the Trail Talk Highpointing podcast. I'm excited to bring you an episode this week that features 3 generations of highpointers. The first part of the episode will feature Ralph and Rob, a father and son highpointing team who started highpointing about 20 years ago when they all lived in Massachusetts. Rob now lives with his family in South Carolina, and his dad, Ralph, is calling in from Massachusetts. This episode finishes with Ralph's daughter and Rob's sister, Emily, and her husband and 2 young children calling in from South Carolina. Emily and her family are carrying on the tradition of highpointing and being in the outdoors with their 2 kids, both under the age of 3. Throughout the first part of this episode, you'll hear Ralph and Rob reminisce about their road tripping and highpointing days. They talk about some of the high points that didn't go quite as they expected and some of the high points that they enjoyed the most. My favorite part of their interview are the moments when either Rob or Rolf will tell a story and then the other will chime in and say something like, "Oh yeah, I forgot about that. That was pretty fun." And then in Emily's interview, she and her husband Hank offer some very practical tips on traveling and highpointing with young kids. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll notice I had to switch to a backup recording of Emily and her family about halfway through her portion of the episode. I obviously experienced some technical difficulties and I apologize for that, but the audio is still the same. So I hope you enjoyed this week's family-focused episode with Ralph, Rob, Emily, and Hank. And as always, if you're listening on Apple and Spotify and would like to watch the interviews that I do with guests, check out the podcast YouTube channel under the same name. And if you're watching on YouTube and you'd like to take the episodes with you on the go, you can find the podcast on Apple and Spotify. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Trail Talk Highpointing podcast. I'm your host, Lauren, and today we have father and son team Ralph and Rob. Ralph is calling from Massachusetts, and Rob is calling from South Carolina. Ralph and Rob, welcome to the show, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's great to be here, Lauren.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I wanted to feature Ralph and Rob and also Emily and her family in the same episode because they represent 3 generations of highpointers. Ralph is the father, Rob is son, Emily is the daughter, and Emily has her own family, and they are also highpointers as well. And so this is really 3 generations of highpointers. That's the first time we've done this on the podcast. I've had a lot of fathers and sons, fathers and daughters, moms and their kids, but this is the first time we have the whole family here. And so I think that's really special, and this is why I wanted to feature that in this week's episode. So I want to get started with how you both started highpointing and then when it turned into a family affair. So Ralph, I'm assuming you started first as the patriarch of the family.
Well, it was kind of a group effort. So it was 2004, and so we're living in just outside of Boston, and it was the year that one of the presidential nominating conventions was happening in Boston. Mm-hmm. So we thought it would be a great time to not be in Boston. So we decided to get out of town. And so my wife, Diane, and I planned a trip to take the kids, there's 4, up to Maine. And we went up to, was it Millinocket, Rob? Is that the town? Yep. And we just decided to get away, go to Baxter State Park and hang out there for a while. And that's what we did. And while we were there, we got the idea that it would be a great idea to climb the high point there. So that's what we did. And I'll leave it to Rob to follow up on that. But after we did that, Rob and I started talking with Rob's older brother, Chris, and we said, wouldn't it be a great idea to do some of the other high points in New England? And one thing led to another, and we took off from there. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think at the time we weren't even aware, or it wasn't a big deal to us that Mount Katahdin was the tallest mountain in Maine. We were in a remote area. We wanted to get away. I think we kind of accomplished that goal just by getting way out into the wilderness. Mm-hmm. And it was recommended to us that this would be a good hike. And really, honestly, we weren't a very big hiking family. We had probably maybe 1 or 2 hikes a year that we would do together. Like climbing Mount Monadnock in New Hampshire, which was kind of a popular mountain, not a high point. But we did that hike, and it's a pretty hard one. I'm not even sure I was a teenager yet at that point.
Rob, you were 13.
Okay, I was barely a teenager. And when we got to the top, Dad, you'll probably remember this, there was a woman holding a piece of paper, and it just had the number 30 on it. And
Yes, I remember. Yes.
we were pretty impressed because the coolest part of that hike for us was realizing it was the terminus, the northern terminus of the Appalachian Trail, which we thought was really neat. And so we weren't sure what 30 meant. So after she finished getting her pictures taken, we asked her, and she said, "This is my 30th high point." And we still kind of didn't know what she meant. So we, after talking a little bit, realized she had been to 30 of the highest points in the States. And it wasn't like a switch flipped at that point. We're like, oh, we got to do all the high points. But it was a little bit of a spark for us that turned into quite a bit more.
Yeah, Rob, I had forgotten that. But, I'm not even sure that I knew it was the northern terminus until we got to the top.
Wow.
You're right. We didn't climb it for that reason at all. It was just something to do after we looked at moose like that the rest of the day.
Yeah.
So sure. Yeah, that's what we did.
Wow. Oh, that's really interesting. So this did start off then as a family. It's not like one person was a high pointer and then kind of dragged the family into it. You all started as a family.
We did. And so the three of us went up that day, and Emily was just a little bit too young to probably try Katahdin, so she didn't do it. But and our youngest, Nick, was at that time, he was probably 3 years old. So he was certainly not going up unless he was on someone's back, and that wasn't happening.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. So what was next after Katahdin?
Well, so it was the same year. I believe it was early that fall. We had been bitten by the bug, so we decided, okay, let's plan a northern New England hiking trip, which was supposed to just be, we're done Maine, so it was going to be New Hampshire, Vermont. And then we decided to do New York on that one, Rob, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah.
So and Massachusetts.
Yep.
Western Massachusetts. So those four, I think we were going to do. And so we headed west through Mass. We did Massachusetts. We went into New York. We went to the Baseball Hall of Fame while we were kind of getting to New York, which was kind of fun. Then we crossed Lake Champlain, did Vermont.
Yeah.
And then I think New Hampshire was probably the last one on that one, Mount Washington. And then we came back to Massachusetts to come home.
That was really, I would say, like the first road trip. When we did Katahdin earlier in the year, just getting up there and spending a few days in the same area was kind of our goal. But here it was one night in one state, the next night in another state. Right. So we were really bouncing around. And while it was, four relatively close in proximity mountains, they're all pretty good hikes. We kind of try and make a point when we've done them that we have to walk a little bit. We try not to drive, even though for New Hampshire, in I think Greylock, you can drive to the summit. We intentionally made them kind of good half or full day hikes. But that was really the beginning of the road trip phase, I would say, of our high pointing. And we loved it. Like that was, I think, what really cemented it. Katahdin was the beginning, but after that, like, okay, this is really fun. We like doing this as a family. And it got us into parts of, we're New Englanders. That's where I was raised, and that's where my dad is from. But we got into parts of New England that we had never seen before, which I thought was really fun. Because, they're not all of those places are kind of off the beaten path a little bit. And the other thing that stuck out was it was in the middle of the Olympics. So this must have been, I guess, August.
Right, it was.
We got to watch the Olympics when we were in the hotels, but then we also got to go to the Olympic Village in Lake Placid, New York,
right.
which is not too far from Marcy, New York's High Point. So that was kind of a fun thing. It was a bit of an Olympic theme to that trip.
That is so unique.
It was, yeah. And, Marcy is still my favorite hike that we've done of all the hikes. I don't know why, it was a long hike, had a lot of water on it, waterfalls and things like that. Very memorable hike. I love that hike.
That's interesting. When I ask people, which high point would you just not want to do again? Or which one was not what you were expecting at all? A lot of people say Mount Marcy.
Well, I'm not sure I'd want to do it again, but it was my favorite at the time, and I was a lot younger when we did it. So,
Rob, what was your favorite high point out in the Northeast?
Well, my favorite in the Northeast is also my favorite Highpoint and probably my favorite mountain, and it's Katahdin. And I don't think it's because it's the first one I did, but kind of separate from doing high points with my dad and my brothers. We had a group of friends that started in high school and continued into college. We would go camping up in Millinocket every
Wow.
summer. So I've done Katahdin 5 times, and well, we've tried to take different approaches. So we've done the Knife's Edge Trail, we've done Cathedral, we've done A-Ball, a few others. I don't think I've ever gone up and down Katahdin the same way, but it's just such a unique mountain. It's so remote. It's not in a chain of mountains. It's kind of on its own. And the views are spectacular. And you really feel like in the east, it's hard to get that far out, where you can really, you're far from light pollution. You're not near major cities. You do feel like you're actually in the wilderness. And I think that's what I love about it. So for that reason, I have to say Katahdin's my favorite.
That's the first one that we did, and I realized coming down that mountain that I had tendonitis in my left knee that I didn't know I had. And oh my gosh, that was really painful as we got closer and closer to the bottom. So, but I figured out how to wrap it up, and from then on, it never bothered me. So, there we go.
Oh, perfect. Well, something good came out of it, maybe. So how long was the Mount Marcy summit and back down total in time?
You
Do
remember?
Rob? I just remember it was a long day.
Okay.
Yeah. For some reason, I want to say it was 7, maybe 8 hours. It was definitely. I feel like I measured them by, did we eat lunch on the mountain? And we certainly ate lunch, and we're hungry for dinner by the time we got down.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that was a full day hike. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard people say I started super early and then the sun went down and I still wasn't back.
Yeah, we definitely didn't get caught in the dark. But we also went in the summer, long days. So
Sure. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So Rob, you were 13 when you did Mount Katahdin. So you're either in, 8th grade or high school or something. How did you guys balance these high pointing trips and these long road trips with life and work and school and family?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure my dad has a perspective on it, because between him and my mother, they really handled a lot of the planning. So we tried to work it around kind of school vacation. I don't know that I ever actually took more than a day or so away from school to do a trip. So we would typically, we got into a bit of a rhythm of this, like our summer vacations were us getting in a car or flying out somewhere and then renting a car and taking, a week, 10, 12 days to try and hit as many high points as we could. So we would try and base it around that. And when, and that spanned from kind of my high school years into college. And, I think it was 4 or 5 of those types of trips, Dad, that got the vast majority of the high points that we've done together.
Okay.
But we had to plan it around it. I mean, luckily summers usually were pretty light on requirements, and I would always work a summer job, but I'd try and take some time away, plan to have a week or two.
Sure.
And those were our big vacations.
Yeah, that's pretty much how we did it, Rob. Yeah, we didn't. You didn't miss much school. I mean, we were happy to take you out of school and take trips, but these trips usually were the summer, and so we were good. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was interesting is when we started this in 2004, it was before smartphones and things like that. So we kind of we really had to do some old school planning. So my wife was really good at that. She would.
Okay.
Diane would call up ranger stations and things. She would get brochures. She would plan out, now you should stay at this hotel and get there on this night. And it was really something. It really was a family effort, even though she didn't she did a few of the hikes, when we went on some trips, but I think she maybe did 3, but she was really the kind of the brains behind it as we took off. And then Rob was saying how, he's saying that we did most of the planning, which is probably makes sense because Rob was only 13. But the interesting thing was that Rob was a great co-pilot. So I'd be doing all the driving, and Rob or Chris would be sitting next to me. Rob loved maps. He'd be going through the map books and telling me exactly how to get to places. Again, before we used much of it, we used navigators eventually, but it didn't start that way. Rob would be calling up hotels and finding us where to stay that night if we didn't have it planned out. And
Wow.
so Rob was very good at planning, even though we did have the mastermind here at home.
It's interesting when I ask people how they got started highpointing, often they'll say, I love maps and I love lists. And so when you said that Rob loved to look through maps, I'm like, oh, sounds like a high pointer.
Yeah. I mean, and I think I don't know which one came first, but I certainly that's where I had to kind of the rubber met the road. I needed to figure out how to get us from A to B.
Sure.
A skill that is no longer required to navigate
right.
daily life. But it was fun. It was a fun stage. So
Yeah. Now let's talk about moving west in your high pointing.
Mm-hmm.
So you complete maybe not all of the Northeast high points. I don't know if you did all of them, but you completed definitely the most significant ones. Where did you move after that?
Well, so it might have been the same year, Rob, 2004, that we decided to go on that day trip down into Rhode Island and Connecticut with Emily, and Emily's friend Tess, and I think Nick was with us too. So I think we went on a road trip. We had the van all packed up. We went to Rhode Island, which is really not much of a high point, but we, like Rob said, we have to feel like we did something to get it. So we parked about half a mile down the road and walked up the street until we found the high point, and that was Rhode Island. And then we drove out to, was it Mount Frisell in
Connecticut?
Yeah, in Connecticut.
Frisell, yeah, and we did that, which is really close to, which is neat because it's New York and Massachusetts and Connecticut all coming together at that little point. And the highest point on that peak is actually in New York and not in Connecticut, but it's Connecticut's high point. So that was next.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was Emily's first high point, right? I think I remember her saying that.
It was.
Sounds right.
That was those two.
Oh, yeah.
Connecticut and Rhode Island. And then she didn't come with us on the next trip, which was a great road trip where Rob, Chris, and I drove down to North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky. So those are the ones we did, the 6, Rob? And they were all made kind of an oval if you could connect them on the map, which we definitely did connect them on the map. But it was fun, and we did those, and we had some good stories from that trip.
I like those high points. They're beautiful, and you get to experience a little bit of the Appalachian Trail, although you already had on Katahdin.
Yeah, those were really good mountains, and it was a little bit of foreshadowing. I don't remember what year. It probably would have been 2005 that we did those hikes. And interesting that I would then go on to go to school in college, very close to those mountains, and then move to Virginia afterward for 8 years, pretty close to Mount Rogers. And then now living in South Carolina, quite close to Sassafras. Like it was kind of dipping my toes into a part of the country that I would eventually spend quite a bit of time. So it's kind of fun.
We have a good story from Mount Mitchell as well that I'll start, and Rob can definitely fill in the details. But so we got there, we were pumped to get up early that morning and do the hike, and it was pouring rain. It was just torrential downpours, and we started hiking, and the visibility was bad, and we just got lost. We took the wrong turn, and we ended up someplace we didn't want to be. And by the time we figured out how to get back to where the trail was, it was just so completely, we were soaked, and the trail was a mess. So we decided we had to stay an extra night in the area, and then we got it the next day. So we had one failed attempt until we got finally to the top. I just remember we were in a swamp at one point, just saying, this can't be the right way.
Right.
I don't know how we did that.
If I remember, I think that was the first of the hikes that we did, or if it was that on that trip. So it wasn't a good way to start. I think we're like, if this is the pace we're going to do these, we're going to be out here a lot longer than we planned.
That's right. And so it was a road trip of a defined length. We had to be back at a certain date. So it did really put us up against the the deadline.
I
But,
think
we
had
had a
to
bit of a
do-
habit of that. When we hiked up Mount Washington, we got off the trail as well. And we ended up getting to the top, but we were bushwhacking it for a good chunk. I don't know how we got off the trail there. We got off the trail in Mitchell, and we got off the trail in Nevada. So that has been a common theme for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And in Mitchell, because of that fixed time frame, I'm pretty sure the next day we had to do both Sassafras and Brasstown Bald, which is George's high point, in the same day. And we were
did.
really pushing daylight there. I mean, we were coming down Brasstown Bald at sunset. But we were able to squeeze them both in and get ourselves back on track.
So what was your favorite high point out of that section of the country then?
I guess I can answer that one. If we kind of consider maybe not just restricted to that trip, but kind of the southeast, I really liked the hike up Mount Rogers in Virginia. I thought that was a really unique hike. It didn't have the same views as like maybe Klingman's or Mitchell do, but I liked Rogers because it was a really weird one. Like you pulled up, we almost felt like, I think we were at times on private property. There were a lot of rolling hills with farmland and mountains, and it just felt a little different. And it felt like maybe the most, it felt the least like what we had done in New England. And so I thought that was kind of a neat thing.
Did you see the wild horses?
Yes, I was going to say that. That's what I liked about it, was that as we hiked, as we got started, there were horses all over the place. We were cutting through pastures and things. I'm not sure how wild they were, but the horses stand out in my mind as being the reason I like that hike the best of that southern swing that we just did.
Yeah. Well, I think they're used to being fed by hikers, so maybe they're not that wild anymore.
Yeah, that was fun. And I think the next journey that we did was the one that we rented the RV, Rob, and we went to, was it Pennsylvania, Maryland, that area?
And I think
New Jersey, maybe?
Yeah, we definitely did Pennsylvania and New Jersey. I can't remember where Maryland and West Virginia. I think West Virginia was not in the RV, but I think Maryland may have been. But yeah, that was my little brother's first high point, and I think my mom's first high point was.
So the whole family went?
We did.
In the RV?
It was a family road trip, and that's one of the ones that Diane did. Rob, Nick was on that trip to Connecticut and Rhode Island. He had already done two. He had two under his belt as a 3-year-old.
He did do that. I was mad about that.
That's so special.
And then it started to get longer road trips. If you remember, Rob, I think the next one was one that, so we reached a point where our Chris, the oldest, decided he didn't want to keep highpointing. So Chris dropped out and Nick joined in, although they overlapped on one trip. But I think the next trip we flew into Ohio. We rented a car and we went to Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Missouri.
Did Michigan
Arkansas.
and Minnesota, Wisconsin on that trip too, right?
Wow.
That was the next trip.
Oh, that was the next one. Okay, yeah, they really
We
do
did a
blend one
loop.
together.
We did a loop down. We went out about as far as Illinois and Iowa. Then we went down to Missouri and then Arkansas. And this was probably this might have been your senior year.
This was 2008 because Chris was going to college, and so you ended in South Carolina where he was in school.
Yes.
I flew back to go to high school.
That's right. So we ended up getting on that same trip where we flew into Ohio. We got Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and we ended up back in South Carolina where I met up with my wife, and Rob flew home, and she was bringing Chris down to go to college. So that was a crazy trip where we tried to fill in all the blanks in the eastern half of the United States.
Sounds like you did it.
We did. We crossed the Mississippi, and that was really something.
Yeah.
So we ended up getting every high point east of the Mississippi after that trip was over, with the exception of Michigan and
In Wisconsin, I think.
which was
Okay.
the next trip.
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
and that one was that had Florida's little high point, the shortest of them all, I think,
Right.
and
335
also
feet.
the-
the least pointy of them all. I remember being there and thinking, is this actually the highest point? How can they be sure it's not that little mountain over there?
Well, I love when people post pictures of doing that high point, and they will dress up in high altitude gear with an ice
that's
axe
funny.
and crampons, and they'll actually attempt to climb the sign.
Oh,
Yeah. I think I've seen that done in Delaware as well. You bring as
Oh,
well.
yeah.
that's funny.
So now let's talk about the further west road trips that you've done to High Point. Now,
Sure.
by this time, Rob, are you in college?
Yeah, so we had one more where we did some we knocked off Minnesota and Wisconsin and Michigan, and that
We
was
went
really
up over the
cool.
Great Lakes. Yeah.
We came up through Canada, and that was a neat trip. I
Yeah.
think that was potentially right before I started college, or that may have been the summer after. But we did one more trip out west that Chris came on, so my older brother went, and that was the one where it was my older brother and my younger brother were out there, and we kind of went straight down the Dakotas. Did Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and that was a really neat trip because we started to get back into slightly more rigorous hikes. I mean, some of them are not, but some of them were. And I really enjoyed those ones quite a bit. I think that's why Chris was interested in coming, because he was going to get to actually do some hiking again. We had kind of gotten away from doing some hiking.
I think that's right. Chris was less into racking up the numbers and more into the pure hiking of it.
Yeah.
So I think that's right. And on that trip, we were going to, like you said, start in North Dakota. We were going to try to do Colorado and New Mexico on that
right.
trip.
That's
But
right.
when we got to New Mexico, which was the next one we were going to do after doing all the ones in that line right down to Oklahoma, we went to New Mexico, but we got to the trailhead, and it was early in the year, and it had snowed, and there was snow all over the place.
Yeah.
And maybe it would have been doable, but I just remember that decision point. We're all standing there. Rob or Chris hiked up a little ways and then turned around and said, there's a lot of snow. I don't know if we should do it. So I finally made the call and said, let's not do it. And we didn't. And we went to Colorado, but we didn't do that high point on that trip, did we, Rob?
No, I think that may have been where we flew out of. I think we flew in and out of Denver.
I think we just
flew
went
in
to the
somewhere and
Rockies
flew out
game
of
and
Denver.
called it.
Oh, that's still fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And other memorable parts of that one. It was on Oklahoma that we saw the rattlesnake.
Yes.
If you remember that one, that was kind
Did
of
you
scary.
hear the rattle?
Yes, and so
I heard it, and it was right in the path, so we had to really
was
go
Chris
around.
first in line, Rob? He was the first. We were it was a narrow trail, so we were lined up. He's the one that I think almost stepped on it, and it just slithered out of the way.
Yeah.
And we were worried. Well, so having failed at doing the New Mexico hike on that trip, we planned another trip the next year with Rob and Nick, our youngest, but not Chris. And we went back out. I remember that, Rob, because you were doing some sort of an internship at the observatory up
in North Carolina.
Blue Ridge Mountains.
Yep.
Yeah. So we swung down, we picked you up, and then we headed west. We were driving in the van, and the van had its air conditioning had failed. So it was the hottest point in the summer. And we drove out, and it was getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and we made it to Texas, and we went down and we did the High Point in Texas, which was a great hike. I liked that hike.
At Guadalupe.
Yeah, we did. After that, we went into Arizona, didn't we, Rob? And up to the Grand Canyon. Did that one?
Yeah, I think we didn't we do New Mexico and then Arizona? I think that's how we did it, right?
Maybe we did.
Maybe.
So we
Yeah.
must have done New Mexico before we even did Texas.
Yeah, that probably sounds right. Because we did go through Saguaro National Park on our
You're
Yeah.
way
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
across into
So you're
Tucson.
right. New Mexico was first, and New
Yeah.
Mexico was a good story. It was an interesting story that Rob can tell. But we did New Mexico, then we went down to Texas, and then we went to Arizona, and we were going to do Colorado, but we didn't make it in time, and we were too exhausted to hike it, so we didn't do it.
Sure.
And then
Okay.
we flew out of Denver again.
So that was maybe our craziest amount of driving. I mean, I was already in North Carolina. You drove down the whole East Coast. Then we drove entirely basically across the country to get to New Mexico. Um, and then we did the loop. None of those mountains are close to each other. And then we drove all the way back. Um,
Wow.
and there was no hiking on a lot of that stretch. It was I
Right.
mean, I don't know how many thousands of miles, but probably close to 5,000 miles on that road trip,
Wow.
Yeah.
which was probably more than 5,000 miles. Um, but yeah, there were some funny parts because those were all pretty serious hikes at that point. And I really liked Texas, but for New Mexico, that was one. It was the first. I think that was our first mountain over 10,000 feet that we had done. I don't think we had done anything that tall. I'm pretty sure,
No,
with the
you're right.
exception,
It was. It was.
maybe at one point because we had taken one trip out west as a family, we had gone higher, but I'm not sure I'd even been at 10,000 feet. Certainly never done any hiking. Um, and it that definitely caught up with us. I mean, we're East
Oh
Coasters,
yeah.
you know,
Yep.
very very low elevation that we were used to, and we had driven pretty quickly across. So we got up to elevation in a hurry, and we thought we might be okay acclimating, staying outside of Taos
Hmm.
at some elevation, um, and then we got out there bright and early that morning to hike. And I mean, it was a pretty long trailhead, and a couple hours in, we were more than halfway up. We all started to get headaches. I mean, we started
Hmm.
to, and we were tiring easily, and so first half went pretty smoothly, and then after that, we started to really slow down.
Yeah.
My younger brother was maybe 10 at the time, so he's pretty
Oh.
young. I don't know. That's about right,
Wow.
Dad? Um,
Yeah, he might have not even been 10 because Rob,
yeah, it might have
what
been.
year did you do
I
that
mean, that
internship?
would have been
2009,
probably, yeah,
10,
probably would have been 2011
10.
maybe. So he might have been 10, or he probably would have been 10.
He
And
might have been 10.
so we've got this collection of people who are pretty tired because we just drove across the country
Sure.
and slept one night at elevation. First really big hike, and we get to where we're above the tree line, but there's still a good push to the finish, and we're basically dragging Nick up the mountain, and we're all not feeling great. But he did not want to move, and I understand why he didn't want to. So we kind of made the collective decision that my dad was going to stay with Nick. They were just going to see if they could go any faster, but I was going to go off and complete the hike if I
Hmm.
could. And then, it was an out and back, so I was going to see them on the way back, and we would all just kind
Yeah.
of head down together. Um, and so that's what we did. And the thing that really stood out to me is we saw tons of bighorn sheep,
I
and they
know.
were
Yeah.
hiking with us basically. And especially once you got up to that elevation, they were everywhere. And it
Mm,
wasn't, we were probably doing this on a weekday or something because I don't remember seeing a soul on the mountain the whole time we were hiking. And so they were pretty undisturbed, and they were very friendly. I remember coming
Yeah.
up kind of over one of the false summits and then being greeted by like a flock of them 20 feet in front of me, which
Okay,
was
that would have
pretty
scared
cool.
me.
So yeah, that was a fun one. And that was one of the few that we didn't all summit together. You guys got
Okay.
pretty far. You put a lot of effort
right.
in, but
That was
yeah,
the
the
team
altitude
effort.
really goes off that.
So
Yeah.
Rob was our representative that made it to the top of that.
Yeah.
And I just remember that. I remember sitting there with Nick when we just couldn't go any further. We're probably somewhere between 12 and 13,000 feet at that point, just watching Rob hiking up to the high point surrounded by bighorn sheep. I just remember that. It's a very vivid memory. So and then we got back down and we felt better pretty quickly once we got down. One of the things that made it difficult, which is something we also encountered in Nevada, was just the loose ground that you take
Yeah.
a step and then you'd slide back. And so it made you feel like you
Yeah.
were going a lot further and working a lot harder than you expected to do.
Right. Now, you guys mentioned that you drove through Arizona too. Did you do Humphreys Peak in that trip?
We did.
We did, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We did. We stayed. We camped out in a tent that night, and
fun!
and then we got up the next morning and hiked it, and that was fun. That was a good one. I thought that was Nick's. That was a good one for Nick too. What was most memorable about that trip, we ended up in Las Vegas, was just how hot it was. It was when the summers were starting to get up, 115 plus degrees, and we had no air conditioning in that van. I just remember we kept stopping at like 7-Elevens and buying big gulps and just trying to hydrate as much as we could. We were melting away. And
we did a lot of camping on that trip too. I remember I rented some camping gear before we left. And so I remember we had a really funny campsite. It wasn't an official campsite when we were in Arizona because we were pulling up pretty late in a lot of these places. We had a lot of ground to cover. But that was maybe I guess the only trip that we really, with the exception of Boundary Peak, where camping was a big component of it. But I thought it was a fun way to do it.
We drove through Utah. We didn't do the Utah Highpoint on that, but we drove through Utah and we stopped at a lot of the national parks on the way as we kind of turned the corner and started heading back east. Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, that was really beautiful. And that's one of the things I love about it is, even just kind of on the as you're going from one to the next, you just cover so much ground. Like I've because of highpointing, and I could say very clearly only because of highpointing, I've been to all 50 states. Haven't done all 50 high points, but certainly that wouldn't have been the case if we hadn't made the intentional decision to kind of go out to all of these places. And I think that's kind of half of the adventure is getting there and figuring out how to do them, not just hiking them or getting to the top.
You're right. Everyone says that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been really fun. And Elbert was fun. So, go ahead, Ed.
So I was just going to say, so that is kind of the end of the long road trips. And from there, Rob went back and climbed Mount Elbert because we got there, but it was like 4 a.m. and we were so tired we fell asleep. And by the time we woke up in the van, it was really too late to get started. So we didn't do it. But you went back and you got to the high point in Elbert. You've also done New Mexico again and so forth. So, but I wasn't with you on those. But we did do one more outing with the 3 older ones. So Chris, Rob, and myself went back out for this express purpose of climbing the Nevada High Point.
Wow.
Which was a story unto itself. But I'll let you talk about getting to the top of Elbert, though, Rob, because that was a good one.
Well, yeah, I can. That was one. That was the first one that I did without you, Dad. That was the first time I had gone out, and I went with one of my friends from high school, one of the guys who would climb Katahdin with us, and we rented a car and drove from Virginia, where we were living at the time, all the way across, didn't acclimate, camped, it just kind of at the base of Elbert. I think the town was called Twin Lakes, and we hiked it. And it was the same day that they were doing the Leadville 100, which is another kind of unusual. Maybe high pointing isn't an extreme sport, but certainly running 100 miles in the Rockies is.
Absolutely.
And that's what it was, a 100-mile run, and you have 24 hours to complete it. And so we were, huffing and puffing because 14,000 plus feet, we were feeling the elevation on that too. And all these people had been running for 8, 10, 12 hours at the same elevation and had the rest of the day to go. So that was a little bit of motivation for us not to complain or feel sorry for ourselves, just kind of keep moving. Albert was cool. The views were unbelievable. And I mean, by comparison, for a 14er in the Rockies, it's not that challenging of a hike, but it's quite rewarding. Like the views were just amazing.
I'll tell the quick story of Boundary Peak. So this is probably the only one that I did. So the first one we did as a group, we went for one mountain, and we did that one mountain in Maine. So Rob, Chris, and I went out and did this one trip. We flew out separately. So I flew out to LA. I had some work that I was doing out there. So I got off in LA. I did my work, rented a car, and then I drove to the mountain. Rob and Chris flew out separately, Rob, and met in Las Vegas.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, and then they drove up. They connected up there, and they drove up, and they visited Death Valley and so forth, and they came up.
Oh, fun.
I actually went to Lake Tahoe thinking that would be a good place to acclimate. So I got out there a little bit early and hung out for a few days and at elevation, went to the tops of some of the peaks out there. And then we all met at the mountain, but we had a little bit of a hard time connecting up at the mountain. Right? I got there first. And then, Rob, you and Chris, how did we
Yeah, I
meet
remember
at
the
that
details of
mountain?
that. That was kind of funny. So there were a couple of things. Boundary Peak is really remote, hard to get to, way outside of cell phone service. And because we were trying to meet there, we kind of just had a rough, let's just meet kind of at the trailhead. That was our rough goal, and we knew that. But the mark, it's really poorly marked. Like getting to Boundary Peak, I thought was the most challenging place to get to. And Dad, I remember your advice to me and Chris was make sure you have a 4-wheel drive car. But we were both really early in our career, and we're cutting some corners, and so we didn't get a 4-wheel drive car. And our thought was, we'll just we'll get as far as we can. And
yes, okay, I forgot
somewhere
that.
we can't drive. I'm sure we'll be able to. My dad's going to have a car. He can pick us up, and we'll just park it somewhere. And that was easier said than done. So you might remember the rest of it from here.
Well, so I had to come down. It was night. You couldn't really get a message to me because you said, we were outside of cell. So I was up at the trailhead in my 4-wheel drive vehicle.
Right.
You're down the bottom with Chris of a very, very windy road, and it's getting dark. And so I finally decided I'm going to go down and look for them. So I drove down this windy road as it was dusk, turning to dark. And I met you at the bottom. You were in a little parking area.
Yeah.
Down because you couldn't get any further up. You had to turn
Yeah,
back.
we had gone as far as we could.
Wow.
Right. But so there was I think we were all thinking we're probably not going to be able to climb this mountain because we're just not going to be able to. You're not going to be able to get up, and I'm not going to be able to find you. And Chris had to be home. We were going to hike it the next day and then get him to the airport. And it was a tight schedule. So this looked like it was going to be a very time-consuming, expensive failure.
Yeah. And the airport, we should note, was in San Jose. Like, it's not like the airport was around the corner.
The departure, going home.
It's about 4 hours away. So not only did we have to wake up early to do the hike, complete the hike, get back down, and then drive across the state of California to get him to like a 7:00 flight. So we really were on a crazy time crunch. So, but somehow you found us. We got up there. We got to our campsite at
set up the tent. Went to sleep immediately.
Not a disqualifying hour. So we're like, all right, we're going to get like 6 or 7 hours of sleep, and then we're going to do this hike. But we were definitely going into it on our heels already. I think is probably part of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's certainly memorable.
So, but it didn't stop there because we got up the next morning, we went on the hike, and we kept bumping into people, and they kept saying, you go this way and you go that way, because it was difficult to follow the trail. At least it was for us for some reason. So, but like I said, this is kind of a common theme for us to get off the proper trail. So we ended up going just like straight up the face of this thing, and you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to kind of go around the side and then get to a saddle and then climb up that way. And it was extremely difficult because of the slurry. You just kept sliding back, and you'd climb and you'd slide back further. But we made it to this ridge that we thought was either the high point, it was really close to the high point. And we had to decide what to do because we now had to budget our time because Chris had a return flight out of San Jose that we had to make sure we could get to. And so, Rob, do you remember, like, you hiked up the ridge a little bit further to see, is this the high point? Is it not?
And the other confusing thing about Boundary Peak, I don't think I'm getting this wrong, is that the highest point on the mountain is actually, the highest point in the state of Nevada is actually not the highest point of the mountain. it's somewhat of
Right.
like a false peak because the mountain straddles the border of California.
Yeah.
Um, and so Bristol might have been the same way, but there's a few mountains that are like that. In Boundary Peak was one of them. So there was some confusion around exactly where the high point was. We went back and like retraced our steps and tried to look at the GPS thing that we were using, and there's some debate in the family on whether or not we actually reached the top of that one. We certainly climbed quite a good ways up the tallest point in Nevada.
Right.
And if we weren't there, we were within a stone's throw of it probably.
Wow.
But
So, Rob, I don't know. Are you counting that one or not?
there's an asterisk next to Nevada in all of our books.
Well, you certainly put in the effort.
Yeah. So,
One that I don't
if
think
it
I'll
weren't for
return.
if it weren't for Chris having to get to the airport, we would have just stayed and made sure.
Yeah.
But we had to make the decision to turn back down and go, and we got him there. But it was a close call. And then you and I, so we covered just about every airport you could imagine. So I fly into L.A., you fly into Las Vegas, Chris flies out of San Jose, and you and I fly out of San Francisco.
Although then, if you remember, I had work to do in Oregon, so I flew from San Francisco to Portland and then back.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Okay.
it was a very complicated trip.
Yeah.
And it was the last one we really did as a family. And I think that was the last one that you've done, right, Dad?
That was the last one I did. My plan, so you did Hawaii with your family,
Yep.
but you did it by yourself, but you went to Hawaii with the family. And
Right.
Diane and I probably were thinking of going to Hawaii January, February timeframe or so. And maybe I'll do the high point there if the road's open and, we can get up. So Rob, if you said you've done 42, right?
Yeah, Hawaii was the 42nd high point and was also my 50th state. So we took that trip as a family a couple of
Wow.
years ago. That was the only one I've done since having kids, and I did not bring the kids all the way up.
Okay.
Because that's a weird whiplash from zero elevation all the way to 13,000 in a couple
Yep.
hours. I didn't want to bring my 3 and 1 year olds up to that.
Yeah.
Are you counting Nevada in that 42?
Yeah, Nevada would be 42. So I think
Okay.
41 or 42, depending how you want to
Okay.
count.
And so I have, which ones do you have that I don't have? You've got
Only
Hawaii,
Albert,
Colorado.
Mauna Kea, and Wheeler Peak. Those are the only ones. So those 3.
Which one? What was the
New
Wheeler?
Mexico, Hawaii,
Yes, New
and
Mexico.
Colorado.
So I have 39
Okay.
and like 3/4.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
And
I
you
took
are
one for the
counting Nevada.
team. I'm counting Nevada, but not New Mexico's got a really big asterisk for me.
Okay. Yeah.
I
Right.
think I
right.
probably Rob could have dragged me up to the very top, and he would have had to do the dragging. But I didn't. I did not get to the high point of that. So I've got 39. Hawaii would make 40 for me, and that's probably going to be it for me.
That's
I
fun,
don't think
though.
I'm going to venture out and do any more. Yeah.
But I mean, look at all you've done as a family, though. It's
it was great.
really
It was
significant, which leads to my next set of questions that I like to ask guests. Can you talk about how it's enhanced the family dynamic and just having these same goals during your travels and having that time together during road trips
Yeah.
and during hikes and everything? What has that done to the relationship as a family?
Well, from a father's perspective, it was fantastic because it really helped to give some structure to family vacations. Because at some point, especially when kids get to be teenagers, I think there's a natural. And thinking back to when I was a teenager, you start to lose interest in family vacations. But I think at least for Rob, for me and Rob, and Chris. And with Nick, all of them, less so with Emily because she really didn't do the hiking. She's gotten back into it now as she's gotten older. But for the boys in the family, it really was quite the bonding experience, and it gave us this goal to pursue. And so every year we were planning the next trip. We were saying, okay, now where are we going to go next? And we plot it out, and we decide which high points we thought we could do on that trip. And it was just something that I really enjoyed, and it gave me, I think, an extended time with all 3 of those guys that I think, Chris, like I said, dropped out for a while, but then he got back into it. it was very rewarding. I loved it.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I completely agree. I mean, really, when I look back at uh, my my childhood and kind of into high school and early college, the big themes were really like outside of all the things you normally do for school, and that age group was high pointing and hiking and sports. And like both of those things, I feel like you made a pretty intentional decision, Dad, to be really involved. Like you coached all of our sports growing up. And those are some of like the best core memories that I have of that age. And then when we kind of got into high school and we're playing sports and it didn't make sense for you to coach all those sports, then we started hiking together. And that was what we spent a lot of time doing. And now with a family of my own, I think a lot of the things that were an important part of my upbringing, being outside, spending time together as a family, taking road trips, prioritizing travel.
Hmm.
That those are a lot of things that I'm trying to do now. My oldest is 5, and we haven't decided that high pointing is going to be something we'll definitely do again. At least it would be again for me. But we've all did Klingman's Dome this past spring,
Yeah.
which was kind of fun. So maybe we'll do some, but certainly a lot of the benefits and just the quality time that high pointing almost forces you if you're going to do it with somebody else.
You're right.
That
You're right.
that's been really important and something I've tried to bring to my youngsters now.
Wow. So, Ralph, how does it feel seeing the next generation high pointing, or maybe not high pointing, but just being in the outdoors with their family, knowing that that's something that you started?
It's wonderful. I think that watching Rob, continue to get the more high points and continue that on his own, and then watching what Emily's doing,
Yep.
because Emily, like I said, she was just on the edges. She was involved, but she really didn't want to do the high points. She had other interests, and now, she may turn out to be the one who carries it forward. And she is carrying it forward into the next generation, but she could carry it forward quite far into that generation, which is great to see. I'm really happy for her, and we talk about it all the time. And then,
Hmm.
so I mentioned, even though she started off being the one that had the fewest, she's starting to really build them up. Our youngest, Nick, who's probably done 25 high points, today is climbing Mount Fuji in Japan.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's where he is.
Wow.
This is his day. He's probably actually done by now because, yeah,
Wow.
he'd be asleep by now. So I think he's finished. So yeah, I'm just enjoying watching them carry it on in their lives. It's rewarding and enjoyable, and we continue to bond over it. So it's great.
Yes. Well, it sounds like you didn't have to really force anyone into it. They joined, they dropped out, and they came back to it later, and that's really nice. It's not a memory that's like, oh, Dad's dragging us up another mountain, you know.
No, Nick might have felt that way a little bit at the beginning. I do remember a couple of road trips because he was just so young, and we were asking him to do things that are difficult for a little young guy to do. But eventually, he really did enjoy the climb. So, and like I said, he did this all on his own. He decided to go to Japan and climb Mount Fuji, and I
Wow.
had absolutely no input into the planning. So, yeah, he definitely carried some of that with him.
Wow. Now, what would you say to maybe another young family starting out and they're wondering, how do I get my kids outside? They're in front of a screen all day. Uh, what would you say to them in terms of how it's enriched your lives as a family? Rob, maybe you can speak to this because your
Yeah.
family's quite young.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what I would say is, even though it's a lot of effort, and especially I'm thinking a little bit from my current situation right now, just getting kids out of the house, car seats, planning, everything that comes with with getting from point A to point B to do something outdoorsy is hard. And there's so many alternatives now that keep you kind of fixed to a screen.
Hmm.
Um, it's easy to not do it, but it's never been something that I've regretted, right? It's always been worth the effort you have to put in.
Hmm.
And certainly, at least in our family, the kids will have way more fun, and it's what they'll talk about when they get together with their friends
Yeah.
or their cousins, more so than the TV show that they watched or whatever
Right.
else they could have done. So, I would say it's worth the effort, and it is an effort, but it's worth doing.
So my oldest son's dog just walked into the room, and his name is Baxter because he was
Oh
named
my
after Baxter State Park. So Baxter, we're watching Baxter for the
Oh yeah,
for the rest of the week while Chris is in Martha's Vineyard. But yeah,
Oh,
so I
gosh.
figured that was an interesting way to kind of wrap up the podcast.
Yeah. Well, Ralph and Rob, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for sharing your memories with our listener and viewer audience. This was a very unique portion of the episode, and we look forward to listening to Emily's interview following this. And again, thanks for the time, and you guys had some great memories to share. I really appreciate it.
Well, Lauren, thanks for having us on. I really appreciated spending this time talking about it all because it was great memories and very enjoyable.
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much. We've enjoyed it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Trail Talk Highpointing podcast. The high pointers that we're speaking with today are Emily and Hank from South Carolina. So to get us started, can you guys tell us a little bit about how you each individually got started in the outdoors, and then how has this developed into a family activity?
I can go first. I guess like around 2000, my dad decided that he wanted to start doing the high points in each state. Before that, we would go hiking a lot and play outside all the time. And so then he started to take like me and my three brothers on little road trips, and we started doing all the high points together. And then once I hit late middle school, early high school, you'll have your turn. Early high school, I kind of was like, I'm a little bit too cool to be going on all these trips with my dad and my brothers. So I kind of stepped back for a little bit, and they kept doing it. But that's kind of how we've always been, like a very outdoorsy family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, I would say I really didn't grow up doing too much hiking or camping. I mean, maybe the very occasional hike as a young kid. But once I got into high school, I would say I had a couple friends and I who would we'd go hiking. I mean, we're really close, like 15 to 45 minutes, depending on what hike you want to go to the mountains in North Carolina and South Carolina. So here in Greenville, where I grew up, so I would get out pretty much every weekend and do hiking. Not too many overnight camping, backpacking trips, but lots and lots of day hikes. But I would say I didn't even know highpointing. I didn't even know was really a thing. Something that never really came to my mind really until I met Emily. I didn't even know that was something people even thought about at all. So, but once I heard about it, I thought it was really cool.
Yeah.
So you guys started high pointing when you got married, and then when you started having kids, are you just like, this is going to be our family thing?
Yeah, that was
Mm-hmm.
speaking of kids, there's one calling her name, but yeah, we had done like a few together, and then once we had kids, we were like, this is kind of a really fun thing to do as a family, because Hank and I love road trips. We love everything about a road trip, and this is just like an added thing to encourage that and something to do together. Like we love gas station hot rolling food, like everything you can imagine. It just fit in so nicely with what we like to do as a family anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So, and like watching my dad take my brothers all around the country and do these road trips together and just like have these really fun experiences, I was like, that is something I want, that I would love to do as a family.
Yeah. So how do the kids take the hikes up these high points, or how do they do it at their ages?
Well, to be fair, we've started them off pretty easy. So their first one was Rhode Island, which is
Probably a good idea.
very easy. Their second one was Delaware, which is pretty much just like a drive up hike. But James, our youngest, he is just in the carrier the whole time, and he does great. And George will hike he'll do an alternate hike / being carried by Hank, and he does really well. But I think the highest one that he has done, or the longest hike he has done, is Kentucky. So 5 miles.
Okay.
He did not walk the whole way on his own, but that we've realized is probably like the sweet spot for his age of not
Sure.
too long, but long enough, like
Right.
to get a real hike in.
Do you guys do any overnight trips with the kids?
We've done overnight trips before. We haven't really done any like camping yet with them, but they do well. If there's, I mean, in a hotel they do fine.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of your most memorable moments, not just on high points, but also in the outdoors, with your family, with kids, and then also before you had kids?
I will say my most memorable high point pre-children was Brasstown, Baldwin, Georgia. I think I was pregnant at the time. I didn't know with George.
Yeah, I think so.
And we got down there, and it was supposed to be a very short hike, and the road was closed. So it turned into 7 miles round trip because we had to park like way down where the road closure was.
Yeah, I think it was like 1.2 miles round trip is what it's supposed to be initially. But yeah, we had to go all the way from the base of the mountain up to it, which was nice.
We got there later in the afternoon because we weren't planning for a longer hike, but it was like really cold, really snowy, which you don't really think about Georgia.
No.
But that, I think, at that point I was like in a horrible mood too. So I was like, "Are you kidding me? 7 miles, but we have to do it. We're here."
Yeah, we did a lot of hiking when George was little because it was a lot easier with just one. I could just strap him on and go. So we did like, I'm trying to remember. I can't remember which high points we did when he was just that little, or we did some pretty good sized hikes though. Then, but once we had this guy, it's a lot tougher with 2 of them and a toddler that wants to get down. So that's a lot more difficult to get out there. But I'm trying to remember even before when we lived out in. It's actually in Colorado. We moved out to Denver right when I got out of the Navy, and so we were out there for a year, and we kind of filled that with as much national park and hiking and all that kind of stuff that we could do.
Awesome.
Yes,
it was awesome.
So I'd say my most memorable maybe was the hike above Silverton that we did. You remember that?
Highlands Mary Lake one.
So yeah, something like that. It's just an absolutely gorgeous hike that you go right into a valley, which is like waterfalls streaming right down from pretty high mountains. And
wow.
Fortunately, we didn't get to go to the very finish, which had a bunch of lakes, but it was because it was too snowed in to even like allow people to hike up to it. But it was just like absolutely gorgeous. So probably outdoors. That might be before kids. Might be my most memorable. With kids, I would say when George was about a year ago. It was just George. You may have been pregnant with James when we did the Meadow Bear.
Oh, Bear Wallow.
Bear Wallow, which is just not necessarily a hard hike or a long hike, pretty short, but you get up to the top and it's got almost 360-degree views of the mountains in North Carolina. I think you can technically, like on a really clear day, see even like into South Carolina and Georgia, and it's just a really beautiful one. He got to kind of get down and run around right when he was learning how to walk. So that was a really fun one.
Yeah. And was that in North Carolina?
North Carolina,
yeah.
Okay.
Just across the border in North Carolina.
Yeah, what I like about those North Carolina peaks, the ones that I've been to that are at state parks, is when you get to the top, there's like a poster that tells you what are the other peaks that you can see from that view. I think that's such a cool feature.
Yeah. Not too long ago, all 4 of us did the South Carolina Sassafras High Peak because they just opened a new trailhead that basically cuts it in half. Because we really, for the ones that you can, we really want to do an actual hike versus driving to the top. But 9 miles with 2 kids is a commitment that I just wasn't willing to make. So they opened a 4-mile round trip, which was a lot of fun. But we went. I told that I gave the wrong information.
Yeah, I would say commonly the distance or things are told to me incorrectly or read incorrectly. So I was told a 2-mile round trip, I was like, I don't think it's quite going to get there when we were around a
Yeah,
mile or over a mile.
it was like 4
We're close up
p.m.
there.
4 p.m. in the
Yeah.
middle of June, which is super hot here.
Yeah.
I said
Yeah.
it was 2 miles. It was 4 miles, like 1,000 feet of elevation gain with both of them. But again, it was one of those where it's like, well, we're here.
Yeah.
Just gotta suck it
Made
up.
it.
What's some advice that you would give to parents who want to introduce their kids to the outdoors and maybe take them on some high points or some other, notable hikes?
I would say, for me, the biggest thing is just kind of making it the normal thing. So starting somewhere close by, just making it normal to go outside, making it normal to go for short little nature walks, making it fun, picking up giant sticks. George loves it. Finding a stick, using it as his hiking stick. And then that way it's just kind of like part of their regular week. So it's not annoying to them when they're out doing it.
And start small.
And also, I mean, we're not against offering ice cream and snacks and treats like that when we have to.
Yeah, sometimes you have to, or the promise of it. If they get like, and George's especially is 2.5. It's like, we prefer you to walk because you're heavy now, but then sometimes it's just impossible to keep him focused. So, and then he doesn't want to go into the backpack, and so it's like you gotta sometimes give him some incentives to be able to want to climb in there, so you can just kind of head on back to the trailhead afterwards.
Yeah. When I talk to a lot of high pointers on the podcast and I ask them how they got started in the outdoors and how they were introduced to it, I noticed a lot of guests saying, my family was always outside. When we went on vacations, it was like we went camping, or we took a road trip to this national park, or we took a road trip to this mountain. And those are their first memories. And, a lot of people might say like, oh, the kids are too young to remember, like, why even do it? But then when they do remember, when they become adults and then they accomplish these things in the outdoors, that's where they attribute it to. That's what I found, at least in doing these interviews, is like, that's the first thing that they'll say is like, I came from an outdoor family. I came from an adventurous family. So, I mean, it's got to start somewhere, right?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think even if they may not remember it, it's still kind of normalized into them as they're growing up, and so if that's just kind of the routine, then it's definitely
it's more natural transition.
Yeah.
Also, we've definitely had to reframe like which hikes or what types of hikes we go on. Like, I cannot stomach taking him or either one of them to a peak that just like has any possible like drop off.
Sure.
Especially not just walking. So like we pretty much pick something that is like very much flat at the top. Might not always have the best views, but at least it's like safer. So just
there's been too many bad stories recently.
So
not far away from us, I think. Actually, some have happened of little kids. So definitely want to.
Oh, really?
The Kentucky Highpoint was great. The views aren't like spectacular, but the top look it. There's so much for him to look at.
Yeah. Wow. So, do you have any stories from high points that didn't go to plan?
Rhode Island was confusing too.
It's just really confusing.
Because Rhode Island was my very first high point when I was younger in 2000, and I don't really remember it, but all I knew was that the sign was where, like, the actual high point itself was closed off at that point. You couldn't get to it, so the sign was where you would go. But now you can actually there's a little path to the high point itself. So it like took us a moment to find that, and then we couldn't figure out where exactly the thing was that told you where the marker was.
I've heard that from some other guests. Yeah,
it's not clear, and then because there's like the little cash box that has the people have written sign and all that kind of stuff, but that didn't seem to be exactly where the high point was. It was kind of a little confusing. And it's just it's right off the side of the road in the middle of nowhere, Rhode Island. So it's just a pretty random spot to be the high point. It's fun.
But I was like, it can't be this hard. Like, this is such a short one, but it took us a while. So that was unexpected. We haven't had any like insane stories yet, and I'm thankful for that because they are so little. But
I know. Yeah, you don't want that. So what are the next trips that you have planned with your kids?
The next high point we're going to do is Alabama.
That's a fun one.
Yeah, and it looks like a fun one. I haven't done that one yet, so I'm excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then Florida will probably be another one because that's doable driving wise and easy with kids. So those are probably our next two. I did secure a permit for Mount Whitney at the end of August, but TBD on that just because of the snowfall. It's like record snowfall this year, so the trail just like might not. I don't have mountaineering experience, so we will see. I'm still holding on hope, but the 1 year I get a permit is the 1 year.
I know.
A lot of little random ones. So we're going to be in Chicago in October, and I can't remember which state I was looking at now, but there's one that's only open because it's on someone's property, like very specific.
Charles Mound. That's in Illinois.
Okay,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I was like, it's not going to be there when people can go.
Yeah.
So another time.
The Highpointers Foundation is really good about working with the landowners in Illinois to establish some dates, and they usually announce it on the Highpointers Facebook page. Usually they'll put out the dates that they're open, but it's never like on a whim. You can't just drive there. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about road tripping with kids? And
yes.
How do you guys do it?
Nervous.
Yeah.
You just have to be prepared to make a lot of stops.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, we are not the most structured about nap time and things like that. So our kids just kind of fall asleep whenever in the car, which is great, but that doesn't always work in our favor. But
yeah,
they're pretty good in the car. But it just takes twice as long. Kids is a lot of fun. I mean, it does take a long time, but you find, I mean, we find random playgrounds. Like, that's what you're looking for along your route now, is like, we need to find a park for 20 minutes.
You stop at state parks you might never would have stopped at on the way.
That's cool.
Really, you can kind of get out, run around, and sometimes you might be a playground or a lake or something. Fun.
It is just something, I mean, they get used to the road trips and things like that. Like, he knows if we're going on a road trip, he's going to get a donut. So we'll tell him, like, oh, we're getting in the car, we're going on a trip. And he's like, donuts? So it's like, yeah, that's his thing.
So what do you hope your kids remember from these road trips and these high points and these hikes?
Partially, I hope they remember, like, you can have a lot of fun not doing something like super extravagant. Like the high pointing thing is a really neat hobby. It doesn't require a lot of fancy things unless you're like, doing the ones that I'll probably never do. And you get to see a lot of awesome places that you wouldn't see otherwise. And then the road trips, again, just like there's a lot out there. A lot out there that you might not like be reading about, but you just kind of find it as you get on the road and figure things out. And it does teach resourcefulness. Granted, like, I bet. It really does. Back when my dad was doing this, he was using atlases and things like that. So I'm not doing any of that. But you still have to be resourceful when you're in the middle of nowhere. And there's no service or things like that, or you get lost trying to find a trail. There's a lot of things you learn that you don't think about.
Yeah. I would say what I hope they take away is definitely a love of the outdoors would be something that's big, and then a sense of adventure and a sense of accomplishment and having a task and completing it, or at least striving for it, even if don't get all 50 or of anything like that. at least making a big goal and then trying to complete it. Definitely something I hope they take away.
Yeah. What have you guys gotten out of a life in the outdoors and out of highpointing as a family? How has it enriched your life, like on a personal level?
Let's see. I mean, just being outside for me is just, I don't know, the best part of my day. So,
Yeah.
but it has made me like a lot more adventurous, a lot less afraid to try things. Just because it's so, I was raised just hiking and doing all that stuff. So I've had a lot of experiences that like I never would have had otherwise, and have explored like all over the country and a lot of places around the world too.
I'd say for our relationship, for our marriage, I mean, that was kind of a large part of definitely like our early relationship and getting to know each other. Was being outside, going and doing hikes. So it's definitely an integral part to that. Something that, hopefully we'll get to just continue doing together.
Yeah.
So, and then just, I don't know, it's just for me, being outside, it's very, it's calming, it's fulfilling and fun. I mean, I just enjoy, I enjoy hiking. I enjoy the physical activity. So just getting out there and, for a hike, for me, I like having a goal that I can set and accomplish pretty quickly. So to me, like pushing it to get to the top of a hike and finishing that's always a good day when you've felt like you've actually completed something.
Yeah. And it's also been a way for me, especially since moving to Greenville, a way for me to have found like a community, especially of women. There's a group that's called Girls Who Hike, and it's just monthly meetups where a bunch of girls go hiking, and it's a lot of fun. So it's a nice way to build relationships. Like it was with Hank, it is here with friends. And it makes for really good memories. So, yeah.
You're right. So I've had guests on the show who Highpoint, it's like a father and a son, or father and a daughter, or a mom and a son. And like highpointing is their thing, and they want to check off as many high points as they can together. Do you guys have that goal with your kids?
Yes. My goal individually with the high points is to beat out the rest of my family members, and I have such a long way to go because I didn't do as much when they were all doing it. So I think like one of my older brothers is at like 45. So as long as I get 46, that's my goal.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, starting them young, we have a lot of time to get all of them would be my ideal. At least 48, at least a little over 48, maybe even 49. Really, Alaska is the one that's just kind of unrealistic. Unless
Hawaii would just be fun.
Yeah, Hawaii would be great.
Maybe the two of them will get Alaska.
But maybe our kids can do that one day. I hope maybe without us, they'll start training young. But I would love to get the lower 48 with them. I think it's doable. And I just think it should be a really awesome thing that a great thing for them to have had in their life and be able to have accomplished. And so I think that's pretty realistic, and I think we'll be able to do that. All the four of us.
And it'll be a fun way to like plan family vacations, let's go on a road trip through North Dakota and go hit up that high point.
Right. Yeah. When I do these interviews with like parents that do high points with their kids, and I ask them to send pictures for the YouTube video, I will see pictures that were taken like from a disposable camera in the 90s of them and their kid, and they're both like 20 years younger, and they're on some random high point in Iowa or Nebraska or something. And then I'll get a picture from like last year of them on Mount Hood, and you can tell just by the quality of these photos that like this has been decades for them.
Yeah.
And that must be so cool to look back on. But like you said, you guys are right. You have the time. They're so young.
Yeah. Well, and like it is funny because the pictures that, at least like from the few that I did when I was younger, they were definitely on disposable cameras.
Oh yeah, those are on your Instagram, aren't they? I think I saw those.
I'm like also just like obviously wearing my brother's hand-me-down clothes. It's just like a combination of ridiculousness looking at those photos, like standing on the side of the highway in Rhode Island with like a giant hiking stick as if I just summited Mount Washington. But they're so funny to look at.
Yeah. Well, I mean, see, that's like a cool memory to look back on, like 30 years later or something.
Yeah. But family adventure wise, this one was in my belly, and we ran the Boston Marathon together. So that was our big outdoorsy thing, the two of us.
Wow.
Yeah.
How pregnant were you when you ran the Boston Marathon?
It was 18 weeks. I should say I finished the Boston Marathon. Running is very generous.
The first 20-something miles, at least, you ran.
Wow.
But advice to parents who are like, I want to go do things more, but like, just with kids, it sounds so difficult.
Start small.
Start small, and it's very doable. And road trips are honestly super easy because you can just like change your itinerary at any time.
Be flexible. Be okay with changing your plans. Be okay with not getting to do exactly what you wanted to, as long as you're getting out there.
But it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.